Right, okay, so welcome back. Hopefully you can see a slide. You can still see a slide that says Lime software.
Yes.
Is that correct? Yep. Good, right. There's a couple of interesting things in the chat just before we get going. Yes, exactly. It is the same for Gigapan. We can embed Gigapans. Roger says Street View for volcanologists. The details on our favorite road sections in Tenerife are very impressive. I mean, absolutely. Street View is a for virtual field trips and things is a phenomenal resource. You know, it's if you're doing anything that involves kind of work close to a road, it's absolutely go to Google Maps, click on Street View, and just see what you see. And the other thing is really these 360s. There's more and more of them now, and you find them by going to Google Earth. Sorry, not Google. Well, you can get them through Google Earth, but Google Maps. Click on Street View, and you'll see a little blue dot, and just click on that, and you'll find a huge amount of material that's really, really valuable, and it's all available to use for sort of teaching purposes and things. So Street View's fantastic. Graham Adams has shared a list. I don't know if everybody else can see the live question and answers, but Graham Adams has shared a list with a catalogue of 3D specimens on Sketchfab. So thank you, Graham. Yeah, there is Malcolm and I compiled something recently. You know, there are it's probably similar to this, that there are literally thousands of hand specimens and things, and well, igneous rocks, minerals, fossils that people have sort of captured photogrammetrically. So that again is a really good resource, and they're ideal for embedding into these models if you want the students to get a feel for kind of what the stuff looks like on the finer, smaller scale. Virtual microscope is another one. And I will be showing you how to actually go around that, how to go about that process. So Lime, just going to say a few words about Lime. Lime is, you might notice a change in the slide format. It's just because these slides came directly from my colleague Simon Buckley, and basically he is the person who developed Lime. We started working, he was a postdoc with me back in 2004, and we started collecting data, and there was literally no viewers to view virtual outcrops, to view 3D data that were available at that point. So he developed it in his mainly in his spare time. More recently, we've had a little bits of funding, and we've had enough sort of spare project money, things to sort of develop it further. And we actually have a couple of developers working for us now, and we've been making it kind of available pretty much for anybody who asked for it. But in the last couple of years, there's been a massive uptake, as we've talked about already, in virtual outcrops. So Simon has tried to sort of, really tried to sort of, tighten it up and everything like that. It is a research bit of software. It's surprisingly unbuggy. I know a lot of commercial software that is significantly more buggy. And Simon is very pedantic about, he doesn't like releasing things when they might crash. But yeah, it is a little bit quirky as well. I would say it's more quirky than buggy. Not everything happens exactly in the way you might expect it to. But what I'm going to teach you in the next kind of 2 hours, hour and a half or so is really is just some of the basic functionality which will really sort of enable you to be able to do most of what we did. So basically, it was developed as a simple tool for students to work with digital outcrops, and it's evolved into this kind of lightweight 3D viewer. And one of the key things is that it has interpretation and measurement tools in it, and it handles really large volumes of data very well. So a lot of the kind of other things like the Microsoft Viewer and all these, people talk about 3D PDFs, all of this kind of stuff, they're all fine for small things. But when you start getting gigabytes of data in, then they very quickly, they're not very efficient, so they very quickly kind of slow down. And it allows us to sort of visualize all this data, and basically virtual field trips is a key part of what it's become about. And as it says, the main feature, lightweight, high performance viewer, because it uses this level of detail mapping, and it looks at 3D models in a whole variety of formats. The most common one output from Agisoft Metashapes is the .obj. but we use .ive. It's a very efficient format, and then .ply is probably the future. So we're sort of, but it handles all of these, and yeah, and basically, and it has tools in it which I'm going to show you for doing sort of interpretations, for measuring orientations, for making overlays and things like that. And yeah, it allows you to everything in it is it doesn't have to be, but everything in it is georeferenced in real world coordinates, which allows you to sort of bring in, you know, photos, logs and things like that, geotiffs if you've got them, and all the models sort of will appear in the right place relative to one another when you bring them in. You can move them around if you want, but they will start out. You can overlay onto the virtual outcrop. You can overlay interpretations, logs, synthetic seismic if you want. You can overlay hyperspectral data, anything you want. If you can make a picture of it, you can overlay it onto the model. And yeah, and there are tools built into it for making virtual field trips. This is a bunch of other stuff. I'm not going to sort of go through the details of it, but this is sort of more about sort of project formatting and things for programmers and things. But I'll just, as I said, I'm going to give you the slides anyway. The information is there in terms of data formats and things like that. So the basic functionality is, you know, for navigating in a 3D window. And again, I don't need to spend a huge amount of time maybe on this. But basically, left mouse is rotate on a center point. Center mouse is pan, and if you rotate the center mouse, if you've got a wheel, then it'll zoom you in and out of the model. But otherwise, if you hold the center mouse down, you just move it backwards, sideways. The right mouse just zooms you in and out. And a double click will reset the center point. So that's not obvious. But if you have got a bunch of big models, and you're trying to rotate it in the center, and you've moved a long way from where the center point originally was, if you double click, left click in the center of the, or anywhere on the model, it will reset the center point about which the rotation's taking place. So that's good to know. You can create lines. You basically go to the line, go up to lines in the data. That's the viewer window there, and then there's the data window there. You go up, and the basic data formats are points, lines, planes, panels, and models. So obviously, a point is a specific point. With a line is a polyline. A plane is a simple plane. It doesn't create complex surfaces, but it will create planes. And a panel is actually just a plane, but you place it where you want, and then you'll see our panels are really important for what we do. And then the models, it'll hold multiple models, multiple 3D models. So you can see in this example of the virtual field trip we were just on, that there is about 6 or 7 models. Some of the big trips, the ones we did to Utah, there might be 20 or 30 models in that list. So to create a line, I basically just right click on the line in the data menu there, or I can get it from the top menu here, or I can use Control L. And basically then I hold on the model and I shift and left click, and it will create the points, and that will snap to the model. And basically I assign a line up in there. If I want to edit it, I have to go back in and select the point. It's a little bit weird. It's not like Google. It's going to change soon, but at the moment you go in and you select the point, and it will go red on the line, and it'll be highlighted in there, and then you shift click, and it will move that point. The editing's not as easy as it should be, but basically that's how you create lines. And we also use the line tool as a ruler. There is a plan in the future to add a ruler tool in, but at the moment, if I want to know how far two things are, I just Control L. I just use Control L, and then I just measure 2 points, and I'll get the little dialog box, and it will tell me the straight line distance of that line, and it will also tell me the vertical distance, which is really useful if you've got kind of sloping cliffs, but you want to know how thick something is. So at the moment, the line tool is also the ruler. It will in the future have a proper ruler, but at the moment we just use that.
There's a few questions, John.
Oh,
there's just
yeah.
3.
Thanks, Jess. Right, does some training exist with Lime? I think there are a bunch of videos. We've got a technician who works for us, Connor, who's been making a bunch of videos which are on a YouTube channel, which I think you can access from virtualoutcrop.com. And I think there are some documents. There isn't a specific training course or anything at the moment, but we're in the process of trying to sort of help people get going with it. Can you add multiple fracture planes? I'm just about to answer that, Rochelle. And types of files that work with transparent backgrounds. Basically, in terms of images, if you're bringing in an image file, then probably the best one that works, as far as I'm aware, with a transparent background is a .png. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but right. Okay, Gregor, is it possible to include 3D structural symbols in the 3D models in Lime? Yes, but it's not. Yes is the simple answer, because we just do it using panels. I mean, we're adding a bunch of functionality around this at the moment, but I'll show you how I would do that. It's not quite as sophisticated as VRGS is at the moment from that respect. So, and that kind of leads us into this idea here about basic Lime, about the planes. So basically, if I click click on planes and then create control and then do create new or do control T, I will get a 3-point. And if I then shift click 3 points on the model, it will create a plane, which can be an ellipse or a rectangle, and I set the size of that. So this is kind of how this is sort of partly emulating what you can do with VRGS there. And you can get all the structural information, the dip, strike direction and everything for that plane in here. What you can't do yet is import points. That's coming, but you can basically create them in the model, so you can have students measuring strike and dip in the field, within the 3D models, if that's what you want to do. And basically you set the size of the plane. I've set it to be a 10-meter ellipse or circle in here, on that plane there. And you can also sort of obviously change the colors of these things and assign a name to it and stuff as well if you want. And basically, this is what we use. This is our sort of equivalent of the Compass Clino in there. So and then the other thing, and it's maybe not very clear from this, is that we're going to talk more about points. But basically, if I see a point in my model, like where it says here, photo 4, and there's a little picture icon. If a student sees that thing there, they have to alt left click on it, and it will open in a new window. And that applies to whether it's a video, a 360, a photograph, or whatever. Anything that's embedded, tied to a point, opens with alt and left mouse. And then you can resize that window by just clicking on there. And I'm not sure if you can drag it. Yeah, I don't think you can drag it in the version that's available. You can drag it in the beta version, but at the moment you can resize that window, and then you just sort of close it there. So that's basically what the point. That's how the people who are interacting with the models use the points. And as I say, yeah, maybe a photo, video, or whatever. And you need to. That window will stay open until I close it. So I can move around in the model with that, but that window will stay open until I just click on it to close it. So then how do we actually build the trip in Lime? So basically, I'm wondering whether to actually kind of do this live, or how are we doing at the time? I think, basically, yeah. I'll go through the slides, and then we've got a bit of time, so I'll go through the slides quite quickly, and then I will do it again live in Lime. I think that's the best way to do it, and we can sort of, you can sort of get the feel for it. So the first thing that we do, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to sort of import. Well, first thing we do is sort of find our 3D models that we're going to use, and we import those, and that's quite a good way. The models on V3Geo all come with georeferenced information, so that model knows where in the world it is. So for example, when I kind of set up the model, set up the virtual field trip I took you on, I imported the models, the 3D models from V3Geo, and I'll show you how to do it. but I imported the models for St. Cyrus down here and for Crawton up here. And that kind of basically gave the software some kind of geographic idea of where in the world we were going to be. Then the big regional satellite view that I used for to show you context is what we call a panel. And basically we use panels for pretty much everything, you know, that isn't a 3D model. And it's basically just a plane with predefined size and location with an image draped onto it. So here you see, you know, here is my panel with my satellite photo. So that is literally just regional satellite information downloaded off the internet, stitched together to make an image. I have created a plane, and then I have, you know, and I go to panels. I right-click on panels, and basically then I have the option to import either an image file or a georeferenced image. In an ideal world, especially with geology maps or other maps and things, you can often get from the web georeferenced geotiffs. And if you can get that, then Lime will automatically put it in the right place. If you can't, if you just literally are going to Google Earth or whatever, Bing or whatever, and screen grabbing a satellite image, then you can also do that. And then you just have to sort of, you bring it in, put it on a panel, and then you have to maneuver it. And there are tools, I'll show you the tools in a bit for maneuvering it to get it into the right place. That can be a little bit fiddly, but ultimately you've got complete freedom to move it around and rescale it and everything. Ideally, the best case is or if you're kind of familiar with ARC or whatever GIS software, you can create geotiffs. And if you can get everything into a geotiff format first, that will speed things up and make it more accurate. But it's not essential. You know, we were very careful to sort of try to develop a methodology that doesn't involve you having to be a GIS kind of wizard. And basically panels, I said, panels are where your imagination, what you can do with the software is down to your imagination. Because ultimately you browse for it, you find, you know, you've already got it in your data file, you put it where you want it to be, you know, when you were compiling your data, you go and get it, you stick it there, whether it's a log, whether it's a satellite image, whether it's a graph, whether it's a picture of a person, whether it's whatever it can be. You put it on a panel and it just becomes a 3D, that panel becomes an object in the model. So, yeah, and basically, yeah, so basically I just I right click on panels, this dialog props up, I decide I want an image file, I browse to that file, and then there are a bunch of this edit panel here. I can tell it how wide I want it to be, whether I want to lock the aspect ratio. That means if there are some draggers as well, I can turn the draggers on so I can drag the panel to make it bigger or smaller, and I can rotate it. If I lock the aspect ratio, which is the default, then obviously it will kind of keep the photograph or the image at the same aspects. That's quite an important one when you're trying to sort of rescale these things. And ultimately, you know, I can give it a name and stuff as well, so I can find it again. And there's a couple of buttons here which allow me to align it to the view. So I can align it vertically or I can align it to my view. And I'll show you how all this kind of works, which are also quite useful. But ultimately, that's the panel. And I can get that dialog box up at any time by just clicking on the panel, right click, and it will come up with, you know, edit panel. And I can get this box up if I want to change it. And then basically, once I've done all that, if I just shift click, it will just place that panel into the model. And generally, you know, we just drop them in and then move them afterwards. If they're not geotiffs, if it's just an image file, you know, I will just drop that in anywhere, and then I will rescale it and stuff afterwards. And then yeah, and then I will drop it in and then use this dialog box. The width and the height, often if we're working with satellite images that are not properly georeferenced, we will often, when we capture that satellite image, when you screen grab it or whatever you do, or you export it or whatever, it's worth actually making a note of how big that image is in real world coordinates. So you can see this one's 42 kilometers by 53 kilometers. If I know how big that is, then I can literally just go in there and type those numbers in, and that cuts out a lot of the dragging around trying to match it up to features that are in the model. So that's a useful thing if you're going to just go and screen grab that area in Google Earth or whatever. Make a record of those dimensions, or at least one of them, when you grab the image. And then the points, basically I just right-click on points, create new point, and then there are a variety of options of the type of point, whether it's a stop, an image, a picture, a document, a video, what have you. And we've also created a bunch of custom ones as well, so you can add a custom one if the one you want isn't there. We've actually distributed a few custom ones for 360 photographs and Google Street Manis and stuff like that. And then you basically you browse, and this is the point at which you either put in a link, an internet link in there, which will take you to external content, or you just put in the local file link to that log or graph or whatever you want to pop up, that photograph you want to prop up at that point. And I can put a description in, and I can rename it and things as well. Yeah. And basically, yeah, and these are the types of these are just some of the customs items, and we've put them in the data download file. So if I decide, I want a 360 photograph, there isn't one in here at the moment for 360 photographs. So I just literally, I browse to that image first, and then I sort of add the actual 360, the link to the 360 in there. And that's our little Gigapan one, and that's our little Street View Mani that we just put in to show people what you will find if you click on that point. And then ultimately, yeah, sort of if we want to sort of add panels and things like that. So basically, if I'm going to create a vertical panel for a log, again, right-click on panels. I will browse to the image. I'll select that image, and then I will just click on the model, and it will drop that log in there. And then I can use those draggers here. I can either drag from the corners, or I can also use this triaxial dragger here to move it around until I get it in the right position. One of the things I often do with logs is I will sort of look at the log, and I'll say, well, okay, well, that's 5 meters on the log. So that's going to be about the image is 6 meters. So I will, or 60 meters probably, sorry, no, 6 meters, whatever. I will then go in and type that in there as the height. I haven't done that yet in this screen grab. So it's just brought it in as being 83 meters high. It's only 6 meters high. When I type 6 in here, it'll rescale that to just be a log at the bottom of that section in there. So almost everything you saw, in that demo Fieldtrip was done with panels. They are incredibly powerful. You can bring in logs, graphs, photographs. If you want your photo, you don't have to have your photos as points. You can have them as panels, maps, all these kind of things. The geology map, the satellite image, the scales that we put in here. The scale bar is literally just a little panel. So if you wanted to put other structural symbols in, you could drop them in as panels and just rescale them. So they're a very, very powerful way of kind of dropping extra information into the 3D model. So yeah, again, just drop it into the scene, and then use the edit dialog button to sort of place it. And I will show you. And in this case, with this log, I've actually rotated it here. So I rescaled it now, so it's now down at 6 meters high. So that was it. When I dropped it in, it was 83 meters high. I've rescaled it now to 6 meters, and you can see it matches up quite nicely with the outcrop. Then I can basically, then I've also rotated it because all the beds are dipping towards the left here, towards the south. This is, but I've rotated it so it's kind of, it's actually aligned with a true stratigraphic thickness. So you can do whatever you want with that. And then the next thing I can do is, if I really want to, I can actually drape the log or an interpretation or anything I want onto the model. So this is where you saw when I showed you the geology map of Crawton draped on. This was how this was done. It was just done as the map was brought in as a panel and then draped on. So you bring whatever you want to drape in as a panel. You position that panel orthogonally to where you want it to drape, and then you have to go in and find the appropriate model. So this is St. Cyrus Num Part 5, and I right-click on there, add overlay texture, and then this dialog box will pop up, and I'll tell it I want to add that overlay texture. I could just bring in an image file directly, or I want to get it from a panel. So I click on panel, and then it will pull up everything that's available on that panel, and I will then drop down and say I want that log, and I will click OK. And then basically I turn the panel off, and it will be draped. That is now draped onto the outcrop. And as I say, that can be done in map view, it can be done with logs, it can be done with, it can even be done with text. If you want to drape text onto the outcrop, it can be done. Now, one of the things that's a little bit frustrating is if I drape it on there now, it doesn't, if it's not quite right, I have to repeat the entire process. I have to go in and delete that texture from that model and move the panel slightly. So we're working on making that better. So that's the one thing that's frustrating about this draping. And what I tend to do is, if I'm going to drape it, is I will get the panel up. I'll get my panel up, I'll pull the draggers up, and I'll just push it backwards and forwards in and out of the outcrop, because that orthogonal view will show me where any bit of that, as it disappears through the outcrop, that will show me where it's going to appear on the outcrop. So, but anyway, yeah, it allows you to drape things onto the outcrop, and then if I can basically, so I've done that. Oh yeah, that's the wrong. So basically, I've done that, and now if I go in here to the visual settings for that, I can basically, if I right-click on there, visual settings, I can change the transparency of that overlay. So you can see I've left it with about 70% transparency there, so that you can actually see through it. I can change that, and I can also turn it on and off as well. So if I don't want people to see that immediately, I can turn it, set the transparency to 0, or sorry, to 100%, and then you won't see that, and basically then you know the model will be, you'll see the model, and then I can create another view that has that sort of basically that has that with some transparency, you know, with it the transparency reduced. And scales, that scale bar there is literally just that scale bar there is literally just a panel that is a JPEG image that I import it, and then I just create make it 5 meters high, and then I just drop it into the scene, and I move it to there. So whenever I think a view in the model needs a scale for the students to get a perspective or whatever, the easiest way is just to drop that in. And once I've done it once, I can just duplicate it. So you can see up here on my data menu here in the panels, I've got scale 1, 2, 3, 4. That's because I had 4. I can literally just right click on that, click duplicate, and then move it to wherever I want it. The other scale we used that you saw in the model was well, and you can bring in any 3D model as a scale. So we got Randy Marsh is the geologist out of South Park. As I say, we arbitrarily decided he was 1.8 meters tall. We've brought in models of the bigger outcrops, the Eiffel Tower, the Empire State Building. We have a Jeep, 3D model of a Jeep that we can drop in. So you can drop in any 3D model. And it sounds a little bit trivial, and maybe it gets a little bit of a giggle out of the student, but actually just seeing a normal sized person next to that outcrop really kind of changes, for me at least, think changes your perception of what you're looking at. So actually Randy's a bit of a joke, but actually, you know, he has significant value. And at the moment I can't duplicate him in the 3D model, so I just, you know, make a different, in the data file before I bring it in, I just make multiple versions of Randy, and then I bring him in and drop him in. So yeah, 2 ways to create scales, either as a panel or as 3D models. It's up to you how you do that. And then basically, yeah. And there are ways of moving, which I will show you. But basically, once if I duplicate a panel, or if I bring in a Randy, if I then basically just right click on here and I go modify location, I can shift click on the model and it will move it to where I shift click to. So I bring in Randy. He doesn't have any real world coordinates at the moment, so I have no idea where he's been brought in. But I then go to the scene I want to drop him in, edit location, and modify location, and then I just shift click and it will just drop him in there. Similarly with the scale bars.
John, we have some questions.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, we've got one from Graham Andrews. Will Lime 3D controls work with virtual reality headsets and hand controllers?
Not yet. but that's again, that's actually quite high on the list of things that we want to make happen. And apparently, according to the people who know about this stuff, it's not too difficult to make this work in virtual reality. We actually have a prototype, but it's not released to the public yet. But it's definitely coming.
And then there's another one from Adam, but it's 2 parts. So the second part is actually private at the moment for some reason. But it says, is it or will it be possible to import from a cloud source or from Google Earth? Or is there potential to have a Lime widget tool to use Google Earth software, if that makes more sense, he's asking.
So
like, is there a link between the two?
So I mean, obviously, as you see with V3Geo is ultimately a crowd source for the 3D models. So, you know, and clearly that is, we're very focused on getting things from the cloud because we don't like the idea of transferring very large volumes of data all around. At the moment, you can't import directly from Google Earth. I'm not sure how easy that is to implement, but we are looking at sort of linking to lots of different cloud sources ultimately in the future. I think, you know, we'd love to, and there are all sorts of GIS repositories with geological maps and sample locations and all this kind of stuff, as well as Google Earth, that it would be really nice if it was if it interfaced more. But at the moment it doesn't, I'm afraid. But that is definitely the way we want to go down. So it's a really good question. But yeah, but the only cloud source it kind of directly interfaces with at the moment that's in the public domain is V3Geo, and that's for the 3D models. Okay, is that all the questions?
Yeah, that's all I can see.
Yeah, right. So basically, building your storyline now. So basically, you know, you saw I clicked down a list of things that we jumped during that field trip. It was really important that rather than, well, you could let people lose. You could absolutely build a 3D model. You could build what we built for St. Cyrus and so on, and Crawton, and you could just give people the Lime project and let them explore it. But what we do is we also build the storyline, and there's a new version of the storyline that's not kind of widely available yet. But the first version of it, which is in the released version of Lime, is the one I used for the demo I gave, and basically that's called the presentation elements. So basically, you need to make sure that, first of all, you need to make sure that you have, in addition to your data on the left here, that you have presentation elements window. So if that isn't available, it should be the default when you launch Lime, but if it isn't, you click on View, and then this presentation elements. So that will pop up there, and ultimately, and ultimately, once that's up there, then you're good to start sort of building your field trip. And basically, what a presentation element is, I set up a scene. You know, I say, right, this is the viewpoint I want. I want the virtual outcrop. I want this log. I want these points. I want these lines. You know, and I basically I set everything up I want the viewer to find when they come to that point, and right down to the level of I can change the transparency of overlays and things like that. I set all that up, and then basically I just go on here, I right click on there, and I go where it says custom views, and basically, I'm going to basically go where it says custom views. I'm going to right click on there, and I'm going to say append new, and that will then appear in this folder onto that list. And then I move and I change, I toggle things on and off. I decide what I want the next scene to look like. And I basically keep doing that. So that list that you saw that was sitting down there when I was giving that field trip, that list is a series of points, a series of points, and I just navigate from one point to the other. Now the storyline, which isn't widely available yet, is basically that, but more sophisticated. It allows you to sort of move things around easier, and it allows you to have nested things with folders and stuff like that. And it allows you, and it makes it easier to set the animation from one point to the next. Because if I just work my way down the list, it will just jump from one scene to another. So what you might have noticed, I was right-clicking on there and going animate, so it will take what it thinks is the logical flight path to the next point, which is good for demonstrations. But in the storyline, when you have the storyline available. You can see that VFT storyline on my version of Lime there. When you have that available, that happens automatically. That's going to be widely released probably in the next release of Lime, but for the time being, you know, we're just using the presentation elements, and everything I did was done within presentation elements. So basically, you open that, you make sure you've got that window, and then you basically create the scenes. So literally, you can see I've done this here. This was my, so I was starting to build my storyline. So my first was the starting point. That was the scene that had the view, the custom view, sorry, the title and stuff. And then, you know, by the time I've got down here, you know, I basically just keep adding views, and I just, you know, custom view, and I amend a new one, and a new one appears, and then basically that will be, and I basically just change the scene to be whatever, however I want to follow that storyboard.
There's another question, John.
Yeah.
It says, can you add a panel with text to each locality? And they say that they've used Google Earth Tour Builder and the version from 2015, and they utilise the function in that.
So yes, absolutely, Rochelle. You can add a panel to, you can add as many panels as you want. So I haven't actually used that Google Earth Tour Builder. That's quite interesting. Yeah, I haven't actually seen that, to be honest. And one of the frustrations we have when we do end up doing things in Google Earth is, as you know, you open the data window and everything's just there, and the students immediately go to the highest level, click on, and everything just appears and it's a mess. So I haven't used that Google Earth Tool Builder, but absolutely at every location you can have, you know, generally what we will often do is, especially if you want it to be self-led, so that you're not there telling them what to do, you know, we would make the first thing a locality, and like you know, there'd be a context and an overview, and then when you go to that locality, there can be a panel of text. And literally the way I do this when I'm building virtual field trips is I just have a PowerPoint presentation, which I call scrapbook, and any figures I grab out of a paper or whatever that I want to sort of annotate or make sure the references on them, or whatever I do, or if I just want to create text, I literally just create it, you know, in that PowerPoint, and then I screen grab it and save it as a PNG or a JPEG, and then I just put that onto the panel. There is, again, I don't want to tease you too much with all the stuff that will be possible in the future. There is a functionality which allows you to add text boxes to views, but again, that's not in the current version. That's definitely coming in the next version. So at the moment, if I wanted to add a text to a locality, or we do this all the time, when we want to add a text to a locality, we literally just type it up in PowerPoint, screen grab it, and then place it onto a panel. Okay. So yeah, that's basically, as I said, building the storyline. I set up the views I click custom views, append new, and I give it a name that's logical for me so I can remember it again, and then I just do the next one. And you can drag these things up and down and move them around and stuff like that, so that's also good. So I'll tell you what I'll do, I'll keep going, and then I'll give you a quick demo at the end. Just a few slides on how we distribute these things and run them. So basically, what we discovered is, you know, we're dealing with, and I'm sure a lot of you are the same, you know, we're dealing with students who don't all have really fancy computers. They don't have necessarily the best internet. They're all sorts of other issues going on, I think. So we tried to develop a methodology where we could run these trips to make them as accessible as possible. So the first thing you do is, once you've created your storyline and everything else, and you've got all of your data and everything, you've created your storyline, and everything is ready to go. You're happy with your field trip. You basically just go to File, Export Project. So up on the File menu, Export Project, not Save, Export, and you create a folder called, you know, day one, or whatever you want to call it, you know, St. Cyrus virtual field trip, or whatever you want to call it, and you browse to that and you click export. And what that will do is it creates a bunch of files that you can see here, which one is the Lime project with this little Lime icon, And as far as the student's concerned, all they need to do is then go into that folder. You will just zip that folder and send it out to them. All the students need to do is open that folder and click on day one. They need to unzip it. That seems to be a big issue, explaining to them that they need to remember to unzip it once you've sent it to them. But once they've unzipped it, they literally just go and click. I've called it day one. If you go into that SRC folder, you'll see that there are two subfolders, data and models. Models, there won't be anything in there because it's unless you put Randy in there, or unless you put some hand specimens or some smaller models, or you use some of your own models. But if you're just using stuff from V3Geo, there won't be anything in there. But all of the data, it just makes a copy of all of the files it needs to use to run are duplicated. All of the images, the lines, the points, everything, all that data is basically just stored in that data folder there. And you can actually go in and have a look at it if you want and stuff like that. So in terms of distributing it, basically once you've exported it, you zip it, you send it to the participants. All they have to do is then unzip it and double click on the Lime project. And assuming they've got Lime. And then basically what it will do is recompile the project. So out of that folder that you've just sent to them with the images, the videos, the points, the lines, anything else that's local data, it will pull that out of there and the kind of central project file to link everything. It will pull the 3D models off V3Geo, which is saving you distributing literally hundreds of megabytes, if not gigabytes of data. And it will also sort of, make sure it pulls the links from where, if you've used your 360 photos from Google, or your GigaPans, or your videos, or Sketchfab models, or whatever, all of those things. And it will pull all that together in the project, and that's what the students, that's what ultimately the students will then work on. And the way as I say, we've run different trips in different ways. Some of them are a show and tell, like I gave you. Some of them, the best ones in my mind, the ones I've got the best out of, is how we run our MSc courses, where we run it in real time, and the students join the trip, and they've all downloaded the project the night before. They launch Lime. We use a thing called Blackboard, which is a kind of academic thing, a bit like Teams. And basically, it's just like Teams. You can do it in Teams or Zoom or whatever. And we all get together and we go to the first look and we talk about what we're going to do the day, and we just run it like a corporeal trip, where you say, this is what we're going to do today. We go to the first locality. We give them a little bit of context, show them a bunch of figures and diagrams and everything to key them in, and then split them into groups. And then they go off and they work in their groups. We go around and visit the groups, and then after half an hour or whatever, however long they need to do that exercise, we pull them back and we discuss what they did. So it's very similar to what we would do in the field. We would drive them in a minibus to an outcrop. We'd say, this is where we are. We'd show them on the map in the field guide where we are, and we would send them off, and then we'd get them together and we'd have a discussion around what they'd seen and done. So that's the best way, but there is no reason why you can't build these trips so that you just send it out to them and say, right, in your own time, you have to just follow, this list of, you work your way down the presentation elements, and it will take you to locations, and it's all self-explanatory when you get there. That is also a completely valid way of doing it. You could also just send them the project and let them wander around in the 3D space until they find the interesting outcrops. And then let them explore it themselves. That's also a totally valid way of doing it, but obviously it has implications for how you designed it.
There's one last.
Oh yes.
Sorry, there's one last question from Angie, asking if you can use voiceovers instead of the instructions.
Absolutely. So we did this on the first time. I had my colleague Adrian Hartley recording voiceovers. So basically, you create a point, and you put the little icon to the point, and you basically put a sound file. So you either distribute that sound file, you either upload it to the web and call it from the web, or the sound files are relatively small, just stick it in that internal data folder as a sound file. And then basically all they do is when they see that icon, when they see that little microphone icon, they click on it and it will talk to them. It talks to you. And you can do the same thing with video. You could record a little video of you just talking into the screen saying, hi guys, this is what we're going to do today. And that will come in that little pop-up window that opens when you open a point. That will come up there. And I think it's quite powerful rather than just having them read it, especially if you're not there to sort of guide them around. So Lime is quite graphics hungry. So if somebody says to me they want to buy a computer for specifically for doing, the students we work with, or the PhD students and things we have or whatever, we tell them the computer that we're going to buy you, or the computer you need to get, will need to be good for graphics and gaming computers. I'm sitting here on an Alienware, which is like, my kids think it's awesome because it has a big glowing alien on it. But ultimately, the reason I have it, I'm not a gamer at all. The reason I have it is because ultimately it has the best graphics capability. And again, if you go to the Lime website, the virtualoutcrop.com, to the Lime page there, there are minimum recommended graphics specs. But generally, the bigger the graphics card, the better it will run. It's not that hungry on other kinds of memory, but it's very sort of graphics hungry. So we recognize also, but we also recognize that not all students have, not all students are into gaming or have the money to buy a big fancy computer. So we've also sort of worked out a way of running it on the VDI. The other thing you need is a moderately fast internet connection. So what we do before we run the virtual field trip is we audit the students, all the students who are going to join the trip, and we say to them, can you go to speedtest.net or whatever, and tell us what your average internet speed is, and also tell us about what kind of computer you're working on as well. Just gives us an idea as to who might struggle. I would say greater than 10 megabytes is a minimum. For a long time, I live in the middle of nowhere. For a long time, at the first start of lockdown, I was running on 1 or 2 megabytes, and I could actually make it work, but it's not ideal. You'll just spend a lot of time waiting around and be frustrated. So 10 megabytes, to the point that we actually offered, we didn't broadly broadcast it, but with our students, we basically, when we saw the audit, if we found a student that had less than 10 megabytes a second, we were prepared to send them a plug-in dongle. We were going to buy some plug-in dongles that you can just send them, which for the duration of the trip they could have a plug-in, a wireless dongle or whatever. But basically, yeah, you need a reasonable internet connection for this to work. Now, what we also did was for people who are working specifically on Macs who didn't have emulators, PC emulators, or for students who had really poor computers, we basically set it up to run on the VDI, the virtual desktop environment in the university. So we actually created a bunch of Lime. We put Lime onto the university's computers, and then basically they could log on, and then their computer just became a terminal. Now that's a little bit laggy because obviously it's all the graphics is being sent back and forth over the internet, but actually it works surprisingly well. So I think it's actually, if you've got students and they don't have big fancy computers and everything like that, or it can be run via a VDI, via a virtual desktop environment, and it will work okay. And I know plenty of people in very rich oil companies who are who are all home working at the moment, and the similar softwares they're using for seismic interpretation and things, they run all those over VDI across virtual desktops because they're not legally allowed to install the software in their house. So this is a very valid way. And our field trip to Utah recently, I think about half of the students were running on the VDI, and there wasn't very many complaints. So, and then then the end of that process is really just to collect feedback and improve. So we ran a survey at the end, and the interesting thing is that if you say to people, "Did you enjoy the trip?" they'll generally say, "Yeah, it was okay." If you say, "Would you rather be in Utah?" they will. I can tell you. I'll show you in a minute. They will all say, or with the exception of a few, they will all say yes. And so if you say, "Oh God, this is never going to be as good as a real field trip because everybody would rather be in Utah," then you're killing yourself. I think what you have to do is frame the questions, frame the feedback questions to be more focused around the learning outcomes. Yes, I know you'd rather be in Utah. I would rather be in Utah. The reason people go on holiday is because they like going to different countries and seeing different sceneries and eating in different restaurants and drinking in different, all those kind of things. You know, we all like going to the field, or the vast majority of us like traveling. That's why we go on holiday. But if you focus on the learning outcomes, you know, did you learn what? Did you learn this? Do you know this? Do you feel more comfortable doing this? Do you feel more comfortable, you know, do you have a better understanding of this, whatever this is? Then you can get you'll start to gauge. And what we found actually is that the majority of people will far rather go to the field. You know, I feel I learned a lot during the course of this virtual field trip. 96% of them, and I think N is about 30 here, 96% or 25 answered. 96% of those agreed. You know, that they learned some new stuff. I have this was a sedimentary petroleum geology trip. I have a better understanding of the exploration process. You know, that was one of the learning outcomes. And, you know, again, you know, 92% feel that they do. So, you know, I felt I learned things I would not have learned on a normal trip. Now, these are master students who've been to lots of field trips already. And actually, you know, quite a lot of them feel that actually for certain aspects, because we are able to, and when we drill down into this, you'll find out it's because you're able to change scales very easily, and people have a much better understanding of spatially where they are, and you're much easier to use analogs and things like that from a sedimentological perspective. You know, actually they're learning things that they wouldn't learn on a regular field trip. So from some aspects, from a learning outcomes, these trips are actually in some ways better. There are lots of reasons they're not better, but from certain aspects that they are better. And you know, the fact that, you know, students, we all know students get into a minibus, you know, you go to start the day, drive, they're all sat up, most of them are asleep first thing in the morning with their headphones in, they drive for half an hour, we get out of the bus. You ask them to look at a map, they generally don't have a very good spatial understanding. We walk up a hill, we've wasted another half an hour walking up a hill, and then we do a bunch of exercises, and then we get back in the buses, drive for an hour. And their spatial understanding of where they are is generally very, very poor. Whereas if you can constantly be zooming in and out, if you can show them, you know, the hand specimens, show them the outcrop, but then zoom right out and show them the whole of the northeast coast of Scotland or the whole of the Butt Cliffs and say, right, we were here, now we're over there, that's really powerful. With sedimentology, being able to just put in a panel with a satellite grab like you saw there of a braided river, say these rocks were deposited in this environment, and you do that at the same scale, so they see the outcrop at the scale of the modern environment, or you could do it with lava flows or whatever. That's really, really powerful. So I think in terms of them saying they learned things that they wouldn't have otherwise learned, I think that's really, really useful. To drape a subsurface well log over the outcrop, very, very powerful, because you suddenly realize that when you're looking at logs or seismic data, how low the resolution is compared to what we actually see in the outcrops. So there's all these extra things we can do. It's very difficult. I mean, we've done it in the field with shower curtains, with logs drawn on them and things, trying to emulate that, but it's far, far better in the virtual environment. So some things are actually much, much better. Would I rather be in Utah? Again, out of the 23 people who replied, 2 of them, well, one of them would actually didn't want to go to Utah, and yeah, all of the rest would obviously rather have been in Utah, and that's completely understandable. But the key thing is not to focus on that, because you know you're going to be disappointed. You know, if you took that as being a success metric, oh, they would rather do the virtual field trip than go to Utah, you will be disappointed. If you focus on the learning outcomes, you will probably get, you know, you'll get a better feedback of how useful the trip actually is. So summary, you know, virtual field trips, global pandemic, were coming. You know, there was no doubt about the fact virtual field trips were coming. We were already preparing virtual field trips for companies and things before. You know, the Leeds Virtual World project started as a disability thing before the pandemic, but the pandemic has really forced the issue. Lime, you know, obviously I'm not selling you Lime, but Lime is the tool we use. I mean, I was very instrumental in designing it, so I obviously think it's a good tool. There's a lot of things that it should have that would be great. There are things that we'd like to improve. There are things, it's not necessarily the, you know, the easiest piece of software, especially when you first start with it. But basically, you know, it is a good tool once you get used to it. I've given you a workflow for building a virtual field trip. And I would say, especially when you get into panels and what you embed with points and panels to augment your virtual world, it's really only limited by your imagination. You know, and this is one of the reasons we're so keen for more people to work with this from different parts of geology. As I say, I'm a sedimentologist, you know, but you know, and here is the Butt Cliffs with a well log that was drilled behind the cliffs on a panel in front of it with massive big correlation panels sitting above the terrain. You know, but I'd be love to see what you guys can do with it. You know, obviously people are already asking questions about embedding the virtual microscope. You know, microscope work's a lot more important to you guys. Geochemical data can be put into the, you know, you can put a plot in, just make a panel, put the geochemical data next to the outcrop. You know, you can do all of these sorts of things. It's as I say, it's just your imagination that limits it. So that's basically the presentation, and I will make that available. What I was going to do now was just run through some of those processes.
There's still 2 more questions just from the presentation, if that's okay. It was just how long would it take from start to finish if you were familiar with Lime to make a one-day field trip? Martha is asking.
I would say, yeah, that's a really good question. If you've got all the material together, you can make that in a day. I mean, literally the one I showed you, at the start, which was obviously only a kind of took me probably about 2 hours last night. Yeah, maybe a full day's field trip, maybe a day or two. Well, I don't know. What do you think, Jess? You're the queen of Lime.
I mean, it totally does depend. But if you've got the PowerPoint already together without all the material you want or the folder, it's just about inputting it. For tomorrow, I think actually building it took me about 2-3 days. But I kind of like what John said earlier, I would do something and think, oh, actually, this could be kind of cool, and then kept adding to it. But what took longer was actually getting the material together. Yeah. There's one more question, but before I say that, Roger says, John, you're making a very good case for combining, in capitals, real and virtual fieldwork.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as I said, we already before the lockdown used to use some of this stuff, and I think, you know, we've been discussing how we will use it a lot more when hopefully the world goes back to normal. So I totally agree, Roger. Absolutely.
And then there's one more question. It says, is there an app version or a goal to produce or develop one that students could take with them in the field or in-person trips on a phone or tablet? Yeah.
So we have developed that for, I mean, the way we do that, we would probably not. Yes, the answer is we developed that for an oil company, and they have it. We are kind of, it is part of our kind of long-term pathway to making that available. So absolutely, I think, you know, part of the idea would be very much around, you know, can you take this, can you have the virtual field trip on a tablet and take it with you? And then that opens up all sorts of possibilities with augmented reality as well. Can I stand in front of the cliff line and hold up my tablet and see the overlays and everything like that? So, you know, we are heading in that direction. At the moment, though, at the moment we're not quite. Yeah, we just don't. Yeah, we need more developers. Well, we need more money. That would be the main thing. More developers, and then that would equal more developers, and we could accelerate this. But yeah, there is a goal to do that.
Can I also add to that, John, that V3Geo works on a phone or a tablet, so you could actually see the virtual outcrop with you, even if you don't have all the additional materials in the field.
Exactly. Thank you, Jess. Yeah. Okay. Right. Okay. So this is the virtual field trip I took you to previously. So, you know, that's where. So now maybe some of this makes a little bit more sense. But, you know, basically, if I've got my data here, so those are all my points. And obviously, if I double click on any one of these points here, you know, that will take me to where that point is. I toggle it on and off just by either right clicking on it or, center clicking on it, or just you know, or just right clicking on it and click toggle visibility. But basically, so that's, you know, that I've randomly picked a point here, but you know, now you can see that point there. And you can also see that the model, because of the level of detail, the model is taking a little bit of time to sort of update. So that's not the highest resolution you're seeing here. So I can go and visit any one of those points, or I can go back to my custom views. And literally, as I say, the way I would start this, and you can have a go at it with the data pack we sent around if you want. The way I would start this would be to literally just start from a blank sheet. In fact, yeah, we've got a little bit of time. Let's do that instead.